Your $4,000 hi-fi system sounds worse than your mate's $800 setup, and it has nothing to do with the equipment. The room you are listening in is running its own EQ on every record you play, boosting some frequencies by 12 decibels, canceling others entirely, and you have never once been told about it. So why does every forum, every review, every dealer conversation send you straight back to the equipment store? I had a Rega Planar 3, solid oak stand, Cambridge Audio CXA81 integrated amplifier, monitor audio silver 100s on solid stands, a system I had spent 3 years building piece by piece, saving up between them, reading reviews, asking questions in forums, making careful decisions. It sounded wrong, not broken, not obviously damaged, just smaller than it should have been. The soundstage sat somewhere between the two speakers and refused to move. The bass was thick and slow, like someone had put a blanket over the bottom 2 octaves. Hi-hats had a hardness to them, a brittleness, that the reviews never mentioned. I kept watching YouTube reviews where that exact amplifier, those exact speakers, sounded wide and clean and alive. Mine sounded like a clock radio in a cupboard. So I did what everyone does. I went to the forums. Within a week, I was convinced it was the cartridge. The Rega LS2 that came with the turntable was apparently a weak point. Everyone said so. And I spent $340 on a Nagauka MP110, which is considered a significant upgrade at that price point. I installed it carefully, aligned it properly, reset the tracking force, and sat down to listen. Nothing changed. The imaging was still flat. The bass was still slow. I was told next that my phono stage was the problem, that the Cambridge Solo one was using was choking the Rega, and I upgraded to a Project Phono Box S2. Nothing changed. I bought better interconnects. I put sorbethane isolation feet under the amplifier. I tried speaker positions in 4 different configurations over 2 weekends. The imaging stayed collapsed. The bass stayed muddy. I started to think there was something defective in my hearing. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book you can buy in our pinned comment below. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. A friend named Marcus came over one afternoon. Marcus builds recording studios for a living. He has been doing it for 20 years. He walked into my lounge, looked at the room for maybe 4 seconds, and said, "The room is broken." I told him the room was fine. It was a normal lounge, 4.2 meters wide, 5.8 meters long, plasterboard walls, timber floors, 2 large windows on one side, a glass sliding door on the rear wall. He looked at me and said, "That is exactly what I mean." That afternoon, he explained something that 3 years of forum reading, YouTube watching, and equipment spending had never once surfaced. And once I understood it, I could not listen to any room the same way again. Here is the part nobody in the hi-fi world says out loud, because if they said it, you would stop spending money on equipment and start spending it on something they cannot sell you. Sound is not just what leaves the speakers. That seems obvious. But here is what it means in practice. In a typical bare-walled lounge room, the direct sound, the signal that travels in a straight line from the speaker to your ears, is maybe 20% of what you are actually hearing. The other 80% is reflected sound. Your speakers fire into the room. That sound hits your sidewalls and bounces. It hits the ceiling and bounces. It hits the rear wall, the floor, the glass, the hard surfaces of everything in the room, and it all bounces back toward you. It arrives at your ears a few milliseconds after the direct sound. Not long enough for your brain to hear it as a separate event, just long enough for it to interfere with the direct signal at specific frequencies. Your brain tries to fuse the direct sound and all the reflections into a single coherent image. In a room with lots of early reflections, it cannot do it cleanly. The result is smeared imaging. The instruments blur together. The soundstage narrows. Bass notes lose their start and stop. High frequencies become harsh because the reflections from hard glass and plaster are strongest in the upper mid-range and treble. Every rectangular room also has what engineers call room modes, resonances, standing waves. The dimensions of your room determine which bass frequencies stack up on top of each other and which frequencies cancel. It is basic physics, and the maths is fixed. In a room 4.2 meters wide, the primary lateral mode runs at approximately 40 Hz. That frequency will be 10 to 12 decibels louder than the frequencies around it. You are not hearing a flat bass response from your speakers. You are hearing your speakers plus a 12 decibel boost at 40 Hz, added by the room, applied to every record, every album, every streaming track, every time you sit down to listen, and nobody tuned it. Nobody intended it. It just happens in every rectangular room because physics does not care about your speaker budget. The people who know about this are recording engineers. They design rooms to account for it. They use specific room dimensions chosen to spread the modes apart, and they add acoustic treatment to absorb the problematic reflections and control the bass buildup in corners. They measure the room with calibrated microphones and correct what remains with digital processing. Hi-Fi reviewers know about it too. The review rooms at Stereophile, What Hi-Fi, all the serious publications, those rooms are treated. The reviewer is describing how a speaker sounds in a controlled acoustic environment. That description is then read by someone sitting in a bare-walled rental lounge, and that person buys the speaker and wonders why it sounds nothing like the review. The industry does not lead with this information. There is no financial incentive to. There is money in selling you a better cartridge, a better DAC, a better streamer, a better set of cables. The upgrade cycle is the business model of the enthusiast hi-fi market. It depends on you believing the problem is always in the equipment. Acoustic treatment is cheap, it is relatively permanent, and once it is installed, it does not need to be replaced. It does not generate repeat revenue. A listener who has treated their room and whose system now sounds excellent has left the upgrade cycle. That listener is not the ideal customer for a hi-fi retailer. A frustrated listener who keeps blaming the equipment and keeps spending money is. I am not being unfair about this. Most dealers do not know enough about acoustics to advise you on it. Most reviewers are equipment people, not acoustic engineers. The gap is genuine, not conspiratorial. But the result is the same. The most important component in your playback system is systematically ignored by almost everyone whose job it is to advise you. Here is the part that clarifies everything. Put a $500 system, a basic integrated amplifier, a pair of Q Acoustics 302 OI bookshelf speakers into a properly treated room. Then put a $10,000 system, good separates, expensive cables, flagship cartridge, into a bare-walled lounge with parallel reflective surfaces. Listen to both. The $500 system will image better. Every time. Not because the equipment is superior, because the room is doing less damage. The room is the component. It always has been. So here is how to fix it. The first thing to do costs nothing and takes 10 minutes. Find your reflection points. Sit in your listening position. Have someone slide a small mirror along the nearest side wall, flat against it, from the speaker toward you. Watch the mirror as they move it. The point where you can see the tweeter of the speaker reflected in the mirror is your first reflection point. Mark it with a small piece of tape. Do the same side, do the other wall, do the ceiling. 3 points total. Those 3 points are where the early reflections land that are collapsing your soundstage and muddying your imaging. Panels go there. Most people treat the wall behind the speakers first because it looks logical. The speakers are facing it. It seems like the obvious surface. It is wrong. The rear wall behind the speakers is the least important surface for imaging. Treat the side walls first. The improvement in soundstage width and depth is immediate and obvious. For the corner bass modes, GIK Acoustics makes a soffit bass trap, a wedge-shaped panel of compressed acoustic wool that sits floor to ceiling in a corner. Around $85 each, you need two, one in each front corner. Place them and leave them. Do not judge the result on the day you install. Come back in 7 days. Your brain will have recalibrated and the bass will sound tighter and more defined than you remembered. The modes have not gone, but they have been reduced enough to stop dominating. The difference is the difference between bass that sounds like a problem and bass that sounds like music. For the reflection point panels, Rockwool RW3 is the acoustic wool used in most commercial panels. In Australia, you can source it from Acoustic Supply or similar wholesalers in 600 by 1200 slabs, roughly $15 per slab. Frame them in 42mm pine framing timber, cover with a loosely woven fabric, Guilford of Maine acoustic fabric, or anything that lets air pass through it freely, and mount them at the reflection points. Around $40 to $50 per panel made yourself. Commercial panels from GIK Acoustics run $80 to $120 each. You need a minimum of 4 for a typical room. The rear wall behind your head wants diffusion, not absorption. Absorption at the rear makes the room feel dead. A QRD diffuser panel, a pattern of timber blocks at mathematically calculated depths, scatters the rear reflection in multiple directions without removing the sense of space. DIY cost around $80 in pine. Commercial versions from Acoustimac around $150. If you cannot mount a diffuser, a bookshelf packed with books of varying sizes, pushed to different depths, does a reasonable job. It is not as effective, but it is dramatically better than a flat wall. The fifth step is measurement. Room EQ Wizard is free software. A mini DSPU-MIK 1 measurement microphone is $99 and works with REW without calibration steps. Sit the microphone in your listening position pointing at the ceiling, play a sweep tone through your speakers, and REW draws your room's frequency response. The graph it produces is the EQ your room has been applying to every record you have played in that space. The bass modes appear as peaks, typically 10 to 15 decibels tall, at frequencies determined by your room dimensions. A 12 decibel peak means that frequency is 4 times louder than the frequencies around it. You have been hearing that peak as heaviness, as muddiness, as a loss of definition, not as a boost, because that is not how bass modes present to your ears. They present as a problem with the system, because they feel like a problem with the system. They are a problem with the room. Measure first. Treat. Measure again. The before and after graphs will show you more clearly than words what is happening and whether your treatment is working. There is something that changes when you see your room's response for the first time. The frustration lifts, the sense that there is something wrong with your hearing or your taste or your system. You see the room doing something specific and measurable to the sound, and you understand why the cartridge upgrades did not fix it. You were solving the wrong problem. Every recording engineer I have ever spoken to says the same thing with the same mild exasperation. The room is the most important component, not the DAC, not the amplifier, not the cables, the room, and not 1 in 50 home hi-fi listeners has done a single thing about it. They keep buying better equipment and listening to it in the same broken room and wondering why the improvement is smaller than the review suggested. The financial picture makes this clearest. The average enthusiast I know has spent $4,000 to $10,000 on equipment upgrades over 5 years. A complete basic treatment for a typical lounge, 2 corner bass traps, 4 sidewall absorption panels, 1 rear diffuser, costs under $600 DIY. The transformation that $600 produces in a system you already own is not marginal. It is the most dramatic single improvement most people have ever heard from their system. It is the improvement they have been chasing through 5 or 6 equipment upgrades without finding. And it does not age. It does not need to be upgraded. It just sits there, making every system you ever place in that room sound better. The question about aesthetics is real, and I take it seriously. Panels on walls look like studio equipment to most people, but a 600 by 1200 absorption panel in a solid timber frame, covered in a natural textured fabric in a color that suits the room, looks like a wall panel. Nobody who comes to my house knows what those things are unless I tell them. They look deliberate. Because they are. Tonight, before anything else, do this one test. Sit in your listening position. Find a 60 Hz test tone on YouTube. Play it through your system at a moderate volume. Then stand and walk slowly toward the nearest front corner of your room, the floor-to-ceiling corner closest to a speaker. Listen as you move. The bass will get louder, noticeably, measurably louder. That is the room mode. That is what is happening to your bass on every record you play. You can hear the problem yourself in under 3 minutes, for free, tonight. Tell me in the comments what your room dimensions are. Length, width, ceiling height, and whether you have done any treatment. I read every single one, and from those 3 numbers, I can usually tell you where your worst mode sits and what to treat first. Next time, I am going to show you the one measurement that tells you whether your system is worth upgrading at all. Most people who run it stop buying equipment. They start spending the money somewhere else entirely.